Hi, everybody. So we were playing at these little singer-songwriter, auditions mostly in these small clubs in mid-'70s, and you couldn't turn an amplifier up past 2 without getting booted out. So there was nothing, really. And then suddenly my friend Joe Nannini, who had followed me down here from Santa Maria, where I'd spent some time as a hitchhiking hippie, and he became the drummer in Wall of Voodoo, but he and I were roommates for a while, and he put this record on, and he made me sit with some headphones, and he said, "This is going to blow your mind." I was like, okay, whatever. It was God Save the Queen. And it did blow my mind. I was like, what? I made him play it for me like about 5 times, and I said, this is it. And look, my hair is still standing on it, literally. So Joe found this girl named Alice Baggs, who was starting a band called the Baggs. And he and I became the sort of the non-girl members of the all-girl band, the Baggs. And later on, Alice kicked me out for wearing a bag. We actually had bags on our heads in those days with tampons all over it, and she didn't like that, so she booted me out. But Alice was a good band leader, and I learned a lot about the scene in those days. We actually changed clothes. Like, we would go to shows with our bags over our heads and all our Baggs gear on, and then we had a change of clothes, and we would like quickly change so that we could just like act like people that were friends in the scene and everything. And people were going, "Did you see that band with the bags?" and everything like that, because of the Damned had taken a famous photo with bags over their heads, so there it went. So at any rate, along the way there was this club called the Mask that opened up, and it became the sort of the hot spot. That and Jenny Linds's house, the Wilton Hilton, Trudy and Helen's place, those were like the hangouts, There was like mostly people's apartments, Licorice Pizza, a few other hangouts. And then there was like, finally this club opened up. It wasn't even a club, it was a rehearsal hall called The Mask, run by this Scottish gentleman named Brendan Mullen, who became one of my best friends. And he was a fierce intellectual, and we used to talk about the sort of the cultural aspects of what we were doing, which was basically drinking and drinking and drinking, and then setting up amplifiers and letting bands play. And these bands started showing up, and we didn't even hardly know. I mean, I was just joining the Baggs. Later on, I joined the Deadbeats, thanks to Nicky Beat, who was like the Johnny Appleseed of punk. And I started spreading the word at the Mask that I was a record producer, because I had done a few sessions in a recording studio across the street, where I had also slept on the floor before I slept on the floor of the Mask. So slept on a lot of floors. And Brendan rented me a room for $50 a month, and I became the resident Mask sound man. So what happened was I spread the word that I was a record producer, and Darby Crash of the Germs walked up to me one day, "You're a producer, produce the Germs." And I said, sure. And it turned out it was going to come out on Slash magazine, which became Slash Records, which got picked up by Warner's, and as a result, some of those records survived the cut. But I had already known, I was involved with a sort of a scam, a recording studio scam, in like a 1975, 76, where people were getting tax write-offs for making master tapes and then just shelving them. And a doctor could do that, or anybody could do that, and write off like, $10,000 to $100,000.
So, Lily Records.
Was it?
Tiger Lily Records.
Okay, there you go. So, and the studio I was working at was one of the fronts for those kinds of scams. And so the record companies had an advantage that they could actually write off a lot of money on Coke and Meatloaf, and need I say more? So what ended up happening was I did the Germs record, and right after that, the scene was so small, and it was so kind of like tightly knit in those days. Your friends were your fans, were your idols, and I've said that a lot of times, but that was exactly how it went. So your next door neighbor would get up on stage, and suddenly they were your favorite band, and then they get off stage and we'd be drinking, and that was how the scene went. There was maybe only 20 to 200 people at the first kind of like go round before the hardcore scene happened. And I do want to segue into gender issues for a second, because I think that what was said was so fucking important that it really needs to be touched on. The early scene was kind of like an outgrowth of Dada and 60s garage bands. And so kind of anything went. It was a free-for-all of creativity, and really until the second wave hardcore thing hit, And I loved some of those straight edge bands like MDC and stuff. Those were friends of mine. I love those people, you know. But until the hardcore wave hit, there was a lot of gender equality, and you didn't really have to play an instrument to be in a band, and you really didn't have to have talent to put together, to take photos or to do a fanzine or anything. You just had to want to do it. And I just wanted to be a producer, and I ended up producing, hundreds of songs and albums, and that's what I still do. So now kind of time passes, right? And a lot of things happen, and then we've discovered that punk has had this peculiar sort of staying power because many things happened since then. The corporativism, whatever that word would be, really took hold. And now that's sort of how the decisions are being made in the world. And big companies always existed and monopolies always existed, but what's happened now is it's like a different kind of thing where they are basically determining. You're not supposed to segregate in society or be racist or sexist or all of that stuff or genderist. But guess what happens when they're marketing lifestyles? First of all, they take the radio station, K-Rock, and they separate it from everything else, and they put one style of music on it. And then they get a certain style of shoes that goes with that, and a certain style of clothing. Then they get a certain artist, hopefully a naive young artist, and they put those clothes on them, and then they put them on MTV. And what happens is video has changed our perception of the world, because literally when you see something through your eyes, it's 10% of your consciousness. And so what happens is all of these screens, the video screens, and the repetition, like Hitler did it, it's like the repetition of like the one fatal lie that just sounds plausible, and then you can just further your agenda with that. So what's happening is all of these things have funneled into a very, very tight sort of lens for the, let's say, powers that be, the companies that know how to exploit behavioral science, all the army experiments, all the Pavlov experience. That stuff is old now. Everybody uses it. I use it on Facebook, you know what I mean? So what happened was everybody learned how to manipulate each other. And in particular, the people with the big money, of course, have the most persuasive and powerful tools to do that with. So now there is a multi-tiered problem beginning to take place that encompasses some of the stuff you're talking about, some of the stuff that, kind of the indie scene was complaining about back when it was still an indie scene, and that has kind of come full circle, and we're now seeing the sort of like the dark flower of the, what you might call the political, corporate, religious worlds kind of ripened, and they've got us all. You go pump at the gas station, it's like I have to block the screen, and social media doesn't help as much as we love it. It's if you want to see hysteria, mob hysteria, all you got to do is just say, hey, I just found out Facebook changed their algorithm again, and bang, it's like, So what I'm doing is I'm archiving. We started an archiving project about a year ago with my wonderful friend and assistant, John Castorina. He has been taking, people used to throw tapes at me, I was a producer, so people would give me the tapes that they made from after shows, or I would record something at a show, cassettes, or sometimes even on reel-to-reel. I had a nice reel-to-reel recorder. So I would bring that along once in a while. We recorded the mask benefits, all kinds of stuff that hasn't been released yet. And he's digitizing it because, of course, we have a problem now, which is all tape from 1975-ish is deteriorating rapidly, and it's becoming a actual, historical quagmire. This is a problem, a very big problem, because recordings are being lost even as we speak. So, you have to bake the tapes, you have to transfer them to digital, and digital's not going to last forever either. Just one, big power pulse and it's gone. So punk will be the last generation in history that leaves a pictorial archive, thanks to the ubiquitousness of Xeroxing, which was the big technology at the time. And so fortunately, we have all these amazing visual documents. And what you said is so true, because the photographers, often, not to be sexist, but often women, the girls that were dressing us up and putting safety pins and cutting our hair, Helen and Trudy, the girls that were starting bands, the Go-Go's, great friends of mine, were beautiful, beautiful, wonderful chicks, with like a lot of heart, I mean, there was probably pretty much a cross-section of women, men, and then sort of ambiguous gender people, and nobody cared, Darby was gay, but see, the thing is, he was like a flamer in the Bowie era, and then he decided to go back in the closet, and I think it cost him his life, personally, because he wasn't quite able to deal with it. But Darby had other problems. He was a hypnotist and a psycho, so... I liked him. He was a nice kid, but he had a lot, some serious problems, and he wanted to be a cult leader. So we started archiving, and we also started making a movie. We've been making a 4-part documentary series on the Hollywood scene, because it never got documented. There's good movies about hardcore, but strangely, and this is always what happens in Hollywood, in the shadow of the entertainment industry, punk rock was completely blackballed, okay? Okay, a couple of bands got signed. X, the Dickies, now look, these are pretty safe bands. The Germs just accidentally because of Slash, and Slash went upward to Warner's, So I knew, because I was in on the sort of like the recording scam, I knew that these bands were never going to be recorded, and I really had a sense of history about it. So I went out, and I have a nerve disorder, so I was receiving money from the government. I thought, well, so I have a somewhat free lifestyle. I could just follow my passion, which was loud music, and I could just record as much of it as I possibly can, knowing that nobody else was going to do it. So I recorded just about everything on the West Coast that I could possibly get my hands on, and I would do it for like $25 or whatever. It really didn't matter. It was worth it, like kind of for the beer and the trip to San Francisco, and the girls and the parties and the fun. I mean. So that's what I did. Now, 30 years later, I look back on that stuff, and I was looking at all these records and stuff, and I was going, these are now like museum pieces. I was right. And I have a sense of history, and I understand a lot of stuff about how all of these things work sociologically, so why not just keep doing the same thing? Make a movie. I'm going to make one punk rock movie. I'm really done with punk rock in a lot of ways. I love it, but it's not like sort of like I don't hang on to it, I've done a lot of things in my life that have not been punk rock. So, what I do want to do, though, is make documentary films about outsider folk art groups. And that's really what punk rock has become. If you look at it from a historical standpoint, and you read the books that are written by the, heavy scholars, punk rock is folk art, and it is folk music. And that's so odd because it's loud, but when you really think about the messages, the complaints, and it's more than folk music. It's also, ironically, and some people might take offense at this, but it's also like Delta blues, because these people lived in poverty deliberately, because they kind of, is this choose the right word? They said fuck you to the system. And drugs, and they died. I almost died a few times. I mean, our lives were hard, but we loved each other, and so we just kept doing it. And we had the sense of a tribe that kind of treated each other with kind of equanimity, and so that was like a safe environment. So now that I'm going back, we've interviewed like 40, kind of like key people from the scene. And we too, Don Bowles, I tapped him to be my narrator and kind of to co-do this movie with me. So he wrote the storyline, and then he did the interviews, and I filmed them until we got Kurt, and now Kurt has been doing our filming for us. So we got about 40 interviews, and we're we're doing the transcripts right now. It's very difficult. I never really made a movie before, and I just barely know what I'm doing. Luckily, I have a lot of tech chops, so I've got a studio, and we set it up for video, and it's fun. But it's been 4 years in the making, and just now getting to the point where we're probably going to be able to wrap it up. So anything that you do kind of in this world, you don't get financial backing. You don't get like accolades or any kind of like, you know, star on Hollywood Boulevard. You do this because you just love the music and the people, basically, you know. And you know that half of them are criminals. These are wimpy kids that, like, you know, got beat up and then like had problems of their own and then went on to, like, you know, try and do something useful with their lives or useless, I don't know. But anyways, that's it. Thanks so much.